Hi everyone and welcome back to my channel. Today I'm here with a new video, and in this video I will be sharing with you all of the drops yarns that I've ever worked with and some of my favorites. It's probably one of my most asked questions are questions about drops yarns and also what yarns I really like to use. I've also noticed a lot of people in general asking on the internet if drops yarns are worth it. People seem to be a little bit skeptical because it's so affordable. So I thought it would be really interesting to kind of just look at some projects that I've made in their yarns, see how they have held up over all of the months or years that I've worn them, and yeah, then we can decide together which ones are the best and which ones I would skip out on. I thought the best way to go about this video is to kind of go in the order of the weight of the yarn. So I will be starting with all of the fingering weight yarns, then I have a couple of the DK weight yarns, and then some of the Aran weight yarns. So the first yarn that we have is Drops Flora. So Drops Flora is a fingering weight yarn that is a wool and a alpaca blend. So this is actually 65% wool and 35% alpaca. 50 grams will give you 210 meters, and this is recommended for a needle size of 3 millimeters, which is a US 2.5. Now I knit a sweater with this held double. So technically this is a DK or Aran weight now, but still it's the only yarn that I use, so I didn't use anything else. And I also have not shaved this sweater at all, I think. So I'm going to show you how it's wearing. So this is the Earth Pullover by Ozetta. And I think I knit this maybe at the beginning of last year. So this is a year old now. And I have worn it probably quite a few times also to work. So it's a little bit more hard wearing for a sweater of mine. And I will show you the pilling that it has. So here you can see a little bit of the pilling. But still, if you keep into account that I've worn this, I don't know how many times, more than 10 times at least. And I've never de-pilled this sweater or anything. I think it's still wearing really nicely. Also, just looking at the general shape of it, I don't think anything has really stretched out or like really changed at all. So I would say this has performed very nicely. And this is one of my favorite yarns actually, the Drops Flora. And I think it's a really great yarn to hold double like I've done in this sweater. But it also works very nicely held single with a mohair or a barst suri type of yarn, or just on its own. And then the next yarn that I have to show you is technically a sport weight yarn, but I like to kind of use it also as a fingering weight yarn. So this is the Drops Alpaca, which is a 100% alpaca yarn. And I think one ball gives you around 170 meters for 50 grams. And it's also intended for a 3 millimeter or a 2.5 US needle size. And in this sweater I have held it together with the Drops Brushed Alpaca Silk, which I will also be talking about later. So this sweater does not really show you accurately just the Drops Alpaca on its own, but I've never held it on its own, so I thought I would just show you this sweater in particular, because I've also heard a lot of people talking about the Drops Brushed Alpaca Silk and just the fact that it pills a lot, which I have not really found in my personal experience, and I did maybe expect this sweater to pill quite a lot because it's very soft, very drapey because of the alpaca. So usually the softer the yarn, the more it will pill. But here that's not really the case. So this is my Fiona flower sweater that I knit maybe a few months ago, because this is now a released design. And I have worn it a bunch of times and there's like absolutely no pilling on this sweater. So I think this is definitely one of the best looking sweaters that I have right now, that I've also worn quite a bit. So even here in the underarm section of the body, there really isn't any pilling. So this is also, I think, one of my favorite yarns, but especially with the Drops Brushed Alpaca Silk, I think this is a really great combination. And then the next sport weight yarn that I have to show you is the Drop Snort. The Drop Snort is a little bit more of a special or different type of yarn because it's a blend of a bunch of different fibers. And I don't have any of the balls here, but oh no, I do. I have one right here actually. And this is 45% alpaca, 30% polyamide and 25% wool. This is 50 grams for 170 meters and also intended for a 3 millimeter or 2.5 US needle size. And I have it in this beautiful lilac color that I'm dying to use. But for this specific garment, I have held it double together with the Drops Kid Silk. Now, first of all, the Drops Kid Silk is not my favorite yarn, and I don't really have any of it to show you in this video other than that I've used it in the skirt, because I do find it to be quite scratchy, so it's not really a yarn that I tend to buy or use in general. But of course it's still a mohair or a kid silk yarn, and whenever you add a kid silk or a mohair type of yarn, That just means that a garment is not going to pill as much. So I have made this little skirt, and to be honest, I have not worn this yet a single time. So we can't really say how well this is going to wear, but I don't have any expectations of this pilling a lot. Of course, it is a skirt, but I think the drop snort, because it's a little bit more of a hard wearing yarn because it is intended for socks, I think this is actually not going to be like a problem at all. And as you can see, this also has a very nice drape, and it created a very beautiful fabric. So I do think the mohair yarn from Drops is very beautiful, and it has a beautiful halo and a nice shine, but I do find it just a tiny bit scratchy. Although in this skirt it's not really bothering me as much. And now that I'm thinking about it, I do have a pair of socks in the Drop Snort, so I will just grab those for you. So here we have the Drop Snort held on its own, so you can see how fluffy the yarn is in itself. This is really a nice fluffy yarn, probably again because of the alpaca in there. And this also has a really beautiful drape. So these are the Fiorellini socks by In Her Skein. And I absolutely love that pattern in general. It's a very nice one. And these socks I have worn a bunch of times as well. And I don't have any wear and tear as well. So that is very interesting. I don't know if I really expected that, to be honest. I haven't really looked at these socks in a while, but I do know that I've worn them a handful of times in boots, etc. So I think the Drop Snort also does pretty well on its own. Then the next yarns that I want to talk about are all DK weight yarns. So the first yarn that I have chosen is actually a new yarn because I thought it would be really interesting. So this is the Drops Fiesta, and I have it in 2 different colors here because the Drops Fiesta is actually a DK weight sock yarn. So they released a bunch of self-striping colors like this one that I've knit with a cardigan that I'm going to show you later. But then I also have it in one of the plain colors, so in this beige color. So the Drops Fiesta is 75% wool and then 25% polyamide. Of course, because it's a sock yarn, that's why it has that polyamide in there. And then it's 50 grams, 110 meters, intended for a 4mm needle or a US 6. And I actually really love this yarn. I'm just first going to show you what it looks like when you have it knit on its own, which I did with the beige yarn, which is still a work in progress, but I thought I would show you nonetheless because you can see a bit of the stitch definition, which is very nice. So I have a little bit of ribbing done for the anemone sweater by Knitting for Olive. The stitch definition is very nice, and I also think it's very soft. And then I held the colored Drops Fiesta. I held that together with the Drops brushed Alpaca silk again, and then I made a cardigan. So this is my own design. This is currently in test knitting. This is the Clara Collar Cardigan. So it's just a drop shoulder cardigan with a nice lace collar design. I actually really love it. I have not worn this yet because as you can see it's missing a sleeve, sadly. But I do really love the fabric of it. So I thought it would be really fun to show you just the difference that it makes when you add the Drops brushed Alpaca silk to the Drops Fiesta. It of course gives it a very nice halo effect and also makes it just really soft and fluffy and really nice and completely different from when you see it just on its own. So here you can see a little bit of the difference. Of course, it depends what kind of project you're working on or what you prefer, but I really like it when you have it held together with the Drops brushed Alpaca silk. Then we actually have another DK weight yarn that I held together with something else. So I'm not sure if I can really review this yarn very properly because I don't know how much that affected it, but this is the Drops Soft Tweed that I held together with a Suri type of yarn from Long Yarns. I think it was the Alpaca Super Light, which I think is also discontinued, sadly, which was one of my favorite yarns. And I knit the Vivian Vintage Cardigan, which is also my own design. It's actually a released design. I don't know how this one is wearing up. Let me just see. There is a little bit of pilling, but nothing too crazy. And I do really like the Drops Soft Tweed. I do think it's a soft yarn, but it does have a little bit more of a texture, of course, because it's a tweed type of yarn. So when you really feel this yarn, it of course is not the most smooth and soft texture because it's a tweed yarn, but it's still super soft nonetheless. So here you can see a little bit of how this has worn over time. And this is also one of my most worn garments or knitted items in my wardrobe. And I would say that this has also worn quite well. So I do think Drops Soft Tweed is a really nice yarn, but this is not a super versatile yarn in my opinion. So I always gravitate personally towards the Drops Lima or probably now to the new Drops Fiesta rather than the Drops Soft Tweed. But if you're looking for a tweedy type of yarn, then I do recommend this one and I think it's quite nice. And then the next yarn that we have is Drops Daisy. Drops Daisy is also one of the newer yarns from Drops. I think it was released last year or maybe the year before that. And this is kind of a dupe to the Sandnesgarn Double Sunday in my opinion, because it's a DK weight yarn, 100% non-superwash merino wool yarn that also comes in very lovely colors. I think I will just show you what it looks like when you knit it together with something, because that's really how it performs best, and then I will show you what it looks like when you hold it on its own. So first of all, I used it for the first time to knit this sweater design of mine. This is the Sweet Sierra sweater, which is an all over cable and bubbly texture sweater. And it's a really fun one, and this is not one of my most worn sweaters because I don't really... Well, I love this sweater, but it's not something that I just wear from day-to-day life. It's just not as wearable for me as some of my other sweaters. But I do really like it, and I have worn it a handful of times. Also never de-pilled this one. And there is a little bit more pilling on this one. Like, I'm not sure how well you can tell, but I can just pick off like little pieces like this. So I would say this has pilled more than, for example, the Drop Soft Tweed that we just looked at, and also the other yarns. Even though this sweater I did do the Drops Daisy held together with a mohair yarn. So that is quite interesting, but nonetheless this is a very nice fabric. And now I'm going to show you what it looks like when you knit the Drops Daisy on its own. Which sadly, spoiler alert, is not the best. So personally, I'm never going to use it again, just held on its own. I don't really like how it looks and how it wears. But it does feel very nice, and if you're knitting something maybe for a child, then I would maybe recommend. But just keep in mind that it's going to show a lot of wear and that it may require some more upkeep than maybe like a more hard wearing type of yarn. So here I knit the Celeste sweater by Petite Knit, like I said, in the Drops Daisy held on its own. And this is the sweater that I have that has the most pilling basically everywhere. So here you can see all over the armpit, the underarms, there is a lot of pilling, especially here on the seam of the underarm. But even places where you don't really expect it, like right on the center back of the sweater, even there is a lot of pilling, like everywhere. This sweater is just pilling. The only thing that is not really pilling is the collar work section, but I think maybe that's also just because it's a little bit less noticeable, and there are also other yarns in there as well. So all in all, the Drops Daisy is a nice yarn, but just hold it together with the mohair, or else you're gonna have a sweater that looks like this. And this was already after one wear, and I have de-pilled this sweater so many times and it still looks like this, which is just not very nice. I don't personally really like to shave my sweaters after every time that I wear them, and this one, even after having de-pilled it, it still doesn't look very nice. Next up we have another DK weight yarn. This is the Drops Karisma, and the Drops Karisma I would say is the superwash version of the Drops Daisy. So this is a 100% superwash merino wool. Is it merino? Oh no, I think it's just regular wool. I think the Drops, I don't know, they have another one that is merino. I will insert a picture on the screen, but I don't really use superwash yarns very often, so. But I have used the Drops Karisma, and I got this quite a while ago because I also knit this cardigan in the summer of 2023, I think. So this is the Tallulah texture cardigan, again one of my own designs. So this is a little bit of an older sweater for me, and I have worn this also quite a few times. Just trying to inspect the pilling. I would say there's a little bit of general fuzziness, like tiny little pilling pieces like this. But if you're looking at the underarms, then it really isn't so bad actually. So I think this is still performing quite nicely, but I do still think that this is a sweater that has like a decent amount of wear still, and I think it's just the general nature of the yarn that it kind of fluffs up a little bit, and that makes it just look a little bit more aged and older, but it's not necessarily pilling. It's just more so like a fluffy halo, but not really in a nice way, if that makes sense. I don't know really how to describe it. Like you would really have to see. Like here you can kind of tell. I don't know if it's really considered pilling, but it is kind of like a type of fuzz that just covers the entire sweater that I personally don't really love, but still, like I said, I don't really classify this as pilling, and I also don't think this necessarily looks bad. So I do think this is one of the better wearing yarns, but personally I don't love Drops Karisma just because of the general feel, so this is not really a yarn that I would use again, but it is one that I would recommend, and especially if you're sensitive to wool, then of course a superwash yarn I think is always going to be a bit better and also easier to take care of. Next up we have one of my favorite yarns. This is also the last DK weight yarn that I have in this video, which is the Drops Lima. So the Drops Lima is actually the DK weight version of the Drops Flora. So this is again 65% wool and then 35% alpaca. Only this is knit with a 4mm or a US 6 needle, and this has 50 grams for 100 meters. And I have made a stripe hype sweater by Kutova Kika with this. Also, I think this is over a year old. I think this is also one of my 2023 knitting projects. And also one of my most worn sweaters, because this is just like a really easy sweater to just grab and go, and I really like all of the stripes that it has. This is a little bit more difficult to judge because of course you are working with a bunch of different yarns, which just changes the way that it wears. Because some of these I also held mohair together with it. But just looking at all of the stripes that are the Drops Lima, there basically is almost to none pilling. Like here we can see the underarm of the sleeves, which I think is looking very good. And then here the underarm of the body, which I think also looks pretty. So this is one of my favorite yarns. I just love the feel and the drape of this yarn. I really love alpaca yarns in general, but it's really nice that it has just a little bit of wool content in there as well, just to give it a little bit more, like a little bit more weight and a little bit less of the drape that alpaca has. And I just think it's an amazing yarn, especially now that I've used the Drops Lima so much. Whenever I see another yarn brand that they have a alpaca and wool blend, I almost always know that I'm going to like it, just because I love this particular yarn so much. And now that I'm looking at the sweater a bit closer, I think probably the most amount of pilling is on the ribbing, which is where of course there's the most Drops Lima held on its own. But still, I don't think it's bad at all. So I will show you how that looks. And I've never de-pilled this sweater, and I have worn it also like more than 10 times. So I think that's pretty reasonable. And then I recently knit one more sweater in the Drops Lima, held completely on its own. So this is a colorwork sweater. And I've also worn this one a handful of times. So this is the Holly Harvest sweater. And it looks like this. I think this is also looking pretty good, but this one does have a little bit more pilling in the underarm compared to the stripe hype sweater. Even though I think I've worn this one less, and it's also newer. So here you can see a little bit of the pilling. And then on the underarm of the body, it's looking a little bit neater compared to on the underarm of the sleeve. Still, I don't think this is bad at all, especially if you compare it to the Drops Daisy. Because for me personally, in softness, these yarns are very comparable. So it's really interesting to know and see that this just wears a lot better in comparison to that yarn. And I think also price-wise, the Drops Lima is cheaper than the Drops Daisy. Then finally, we also have the Aran weight version of the Drops Lima or Drops Flora, which is Drops Nepal. So this is 75 meters for 50 grams, and this is intended for a 5mm needle or a US 8. And I have it in this cream color right now. And I knit a cardigan with that, and this cardigan is also over a year old, because this is another version of the Vivian Vintage cardigan that I knit in this beautiful like rusty orange color, which I absolutely adore. This one also shows a little bit more wear and tear, and I have worn this sweater I think also more than 10 times. I think there is mostly pilling here on the front actually. So here you can see on the front of the sweater that there's quite a bit of pilling. Now actually the underarm of the sweater to me doesn't look so bad, but I do believe that I've de-pilled this sweater a few times. In my opinion, for some reason, the Drops Lima wears a little bit better compared to the Drops Nepal. I'm not sure what that is. Maybe it has to do with the way that the yarns are plied, that this is like more prone to pilling or anything. I'm not entirely sure. Nonetheless, I do still think this is a really nice yarn, and I do think it's also quite heavy. So I don't think I would ever use this yarn held together with a drop skid silk or a mohair silk. But on its own, it's quite nice. But I do just think that it creates a very heavy garment, which is why I made my second version of this cardigan with a DK weight and a lace weight yarn rather than just doing it with an Aran weight yarn. Then another yarn that is technically an Aran weight yarn to Drops design is the Drops brushed alpaca silk, which I have never held it on its own and used it as an Aran weight yarn. I've only ever held it together with other yarns and I really like it for that purpose. I think it's a really nice mohair substitute. It's much softer. It does of course give a different look and feel, because I know a lot of people also like to use mohair because of the shine that it gives. And I think personally, if you use the drops brushed alpaca silk, it's a lot more matte and you're mostly choosing the fuzziness that it gives the yarn. And now, like I said, some people have said that this yarn pills a lot, and I don't really have that experience, but I also have not used it a ton of times. But I do have, of course, that Fiona flower sweater that I have worn a handful of times, and it doesn't really show any pilling. It still looks pretty much perfect to when I finish knitting it. So just based on that, I do think it's an amazing yarn, and I will continue to use it because like I said, I really like it, and it's very affordable. I really like the colors that it comes in. Honestly, the only downside to me personally would be that they don't have all of the colors. I would just have, like, I would love it if they had like 60 or 100 different colors, basically, like they do in their kid silk mohair. So that is my personal only downside. Maybe if you were to knit this held on its own, it would do a lot more pilling, but I think that's also because, in my personal opinion, this is just not really a Aran weight yarn. And I think then in combination with just knitting it loosely and then having so much fuss, I think that is what maybe makes it pill a lot. And then when you hold it together with something else, maybe it's less prone to pilling, because also with the tighter gauge, etc. I'm not sure. Then the final yarn that we have is the Drops Air, which is a really beautiful yarn. Let me find a ball of it. The Drops Air is a blown yarn, which is really interesting. A blown yarn is where there is kind of like a cotton core usually, and then they blow fibers into it, and it makes a really lightweight yarn while still being quite bulky. So you don't get a very heavy garment, like for example with the Drops Nepal. So the Drops Air has 65% alpaca, 28% polyamide and 7% wool, and 50 grams will give you 150 meters. And you can still knit this with a 5mm or a US 8 needle, in comparison to the Drops Nepal, which then has half the amount of meters or yardage than the Drops Air. So that is why this yarn is really nice. And I have a couple of different projects that I've made with it. First of all, we have a hat. This is the Edge of Twilight hat by Drops Design. So this is a free pattern. This is one of my most worn knits. I think it's a year old, and I wear it almost every day. And this is the second winter that I've had it. And it absolutely has no pilling. And I'm not sure if hats usually have pilling or not, but this one in particular just basically looks the same as when I first finished it. I think the only thing that has happened is maybe that it has stretched out a little bit, but the hat was already a little bit too big for me to begin with, so it does still feel a little bit loose, but that is also my own fault. And I do really love this pattern as well, and I'm thinking of knitting another one because I wear this one so much. So I love the yarn for that one. Then I also have it knit into a cardigan with 2 different strands of mohair held together. So this is the cardigan number 8, I think, from My Favorite Things Knitwear. That is knit, I think, also on very bulky needles, like 5.5mm needles. And I've never deep pilled this one, and I have also worn this one a handful of times. So here we can see a little bit of the sleeve underarm, which it is a little bit difficult to tell, but there's like a tiny bit of pilling, like nothing major, like tiny bits. And then I don't think there's any pilling on the underarm. That still looks very nice, but there is a little bit of pilling on the front pocket, which you can see here. There are just some little pills here and there, like this stuff. Other than that, this is still looking pretty good, and I also think that it's because the mohair that I used for this was from a cone and it didn't have any silk in there, so it's not the highest quality mohair in general. But sadly, this is the closest that I have to the Drops Air in a garment on its own, because sadly I just don't have any of those yet. I don't know if I'm ever going to, but maybe I should. And then I actually today finished a scarf that I knit with the Drops Air, but then I did of course color work, which you can see here. There is actually a test knit call for this right now. So if you're interested in test knitting this scarf for me, then the link to apply will be in my description. This is the Quinty Quilt Scarf, and it's a scarf with quilt inspired colorwork motifs, which is really fun. And I have not worn this yet because I finished it today. But so far I'm loving the way that this is looking, and I also decided to size up with the needle to accommodate for the colorwork. And I think that actually works still really nicely with the Drops Air. So I'm gonna show you. So this is it knit on 6mm needles, and I still think that gives a really beautiful and nice fabric. So I'm very excited to see how this is going to wear and last over time. And if it's going to be anything like my hat, then I'm not in any doubt. Now that I'm feeling this, I do think this feels a little bit less soft in comparison to this. But still, this is very soft. So maybe it becomes a little bit less soft over time. I'm not entirely sure. Of course, the hat also has been kind of abused or exposed to a lot of different weather conditions like snow and rain and hail and all of those things. So maybe that has also made this one just a little bit less soft. But in general, the Drops Air is super soft, super nice and squishy yarn, and one of my favorites as well. So those were all of the Drops yarns that I've ever knit with. If I had to give my top 5, which is very difficult to do, I would probably rate the Drops Brushed Alpaca Silk on number 1, and then I would have Drops Lima on number 2, Drops Air on number 3, Drops Fiesta maybe on number 4, and then the Drops Nord. Ooh, that's actually very difficult. Yeah, the Drops Nord on number 5. I think those are my favorite yarns from Drops Design. It kind of depends also what I'm wanting to knit, but personally these yarns just have really nice feel and drape, and they have worn very well over time, and that's why I really love these yarns in particular. The Drops Daisy is something that I personally stay away from because of the pilling, and the Drops Kid Silk is usually a little bit scratchy, but still not bad overall if you're knitting on a budget. So I really hope that you enjoyed this video and that it was somewhat helpful for you. If you have any experience with Drops yarns, whether they're positive or negative, please let them know in the comments, and it would be really helpful probably for a lot of knitters to read your experience as well. So for now, I really hope you enjoyed this video. I wish you all a very happy day, happy knitting, and I hope to see you next time. Bye bye!